Hello everybody and welcome back to World of Warships with Wadres, and for today's video I am going to be looking at the developer's bulletin for update 9.6, which is a couple of weeks away at this point. Well, actually probably still more like 3 weeks, but that is what it is. Apparently, this update is going to be focused around the German aircraft carriers that are currently in progress for development. My understanding, I guess, is that they are the testing and everything on the public test servers is going well with them to a certain degree, and they are getting ready to move them into the game to some respect. So let's briefly discuss their features. Looks like they are outfitted with armor-penetrating rockets, which are, by all respects, according to this, pretty much useless against destroyers, but will be effective against light or heavy cruisers and battleships. Their bombers carry armor-penetrating bombs, which, again, this is going to be most useful against battleships and cruisers. And they have a unique attack approach where they immediately dive instead of raising to an attack altitude. Therefore, you have very little time to actually adjust course once you initiate your attack. So, what they are saying by most effectively dropped on slower targets, this basically means you're wanting to focus more on battleships than anything else. Let's see, torpedoes dropped by German aircraft are fast, which is good. We've actually needed torpedoes that are nice and fast in aircraft carriers for a while. But they have a short range and cause modest damage. Personally, I don't see how this affects me too much. Usually I try to drop as close to a target as I possibly can anyway. So, there is that. I'm kind of curious as to what they mean by modest damage. I'm sure we'll get that information when we actually get closer to the release. And of course the aircraft have high cruise speed but small HP pools, so we're looking at aircraft that are about as survivable to some degree as those of Graf Zeppelin. Which, I mean, if you've played the Graf Zeppelin to a certain degree, you'll probably have no issue at all with these ships. Now, the aircraft carriers that are coming out in the early release with Update 9.6 are the Rhein, the Weser, and August von Parseval. They can be completed by special missions, which obviously will drop from containers, and, well, we already know how this all works to some degree. You can get containers from the directives, and I'm sure they're also going to have some that are available as a doubloon purchase through the armory, because that's just the way things go. And we'll also talk about the German tokens for the special missions when we get closer to there as well. Now, along with all of this, we are getting a few permanent camouflages that will be nice additions for some people. We've got the Iron Cross camouflage, or black, white, and red. Now, the Iron Cross camouflages, which will be for the Große Kurfürst, Z-52, and Hindenburg, and it does look rather snappy, if I'm being perfectly honest. So maybe if I get enough German tokens, I'll pull that out for a couple of my ships. And of course, there is going to be a regular expendable camouflage, the black, white, and red, which will be over the course of this update as well. The port of Hamburg has been updated to kind of commemorate the event. It's going to be, I guess, a little festive-ish for German colors, as it were. Update 9.6 also looks like it is going to bring a season of ranked battles in 7 vs 7 at Tier 8. So this is going to be a ranked season that has full access to Tier 8 aircraft carriers, which means anybody who has, say, the August von Parseval or the Graf Zeppelin will be fully capable of taking part in it as well. They are also changing the modules interface for I guess, ease of access or ease of navigation. The tab is being renamed Equipment, apparently. Overall, the interface it's just getting some improvements and streamlining everything. You basically have access to everything on one page instead of having to navigate through 2 or 3 separate tabs within that heading. And apparently it's also supposed to be a little bit more clear as to what's better or worse or whatever. And also you will be able to see all of this with the ship preview mode as well if you're looking at a ship that you have not yet purchased. And of course they're also working on some other minor improvements, which include lighting modules for the a couple of the ports and just a few other icon descriptions. I suppose without much further looking at those notes, I should probably get into looking at these German aircraft carriers just a little bit and kind of go over what they're looking at right at the moment. Now, I am going to come right out and say that these are work-in-progress ships. Some of these stats are very likely to change. I just don't have the work-in-progress badge to put over them, so I apologize to Wargaming for that just a little bit. First off, it looks like we're starting with the Rhein, most likely named for the Rhine River, of course. I mean, she's got decent armor. She is a Tier 6 aircraft carrier, nothing special there. But she does have a relatively nice, thick, armored deck to some degree, so she'll actually be able to avoid plunging fire to some degree, which is something that low-tier aircraft carriers generally have issues with. This will put her a little bit more in line with the Tier 6 Royal Navy aircraft carriers, and that's probably not a bad thing from the perspective of a aircraft carrier player. And of course she does have a reasonable armor belt, so she can actually be rather tanky to some degree. Now, looking at other things, she does have, in her current iteration, 31,500 hit points and 16% torpedo damage reduction, which is respectable. Her aircraft are pretty nice as well. We've got the AR-68 attack fighter. We've got the AR-95B torpedo bombers. Let's see, there's the AR-68s. There's the AR-95s. And then we have HE-50 dive bombers. Now, the attack aircraft currently have 1,190 hit points, have a cruise speed of 114 knots with a maximum speed of 154, 5-second engine boost, 10-second reload time on the boost. There are 3 aircraft in the attacking flight and 6 per squadron. There are 2 rockets in the payload, which do a maximum of 1,600 damage, so this is also looking like 6 rockets per strike. The aircraft are seen at 10 kilometers, and you have a maximum of 9 on deck, restoring in 44 seconds. For the torpedo bombers, we see 1,300 hit points, a cruise speed of 111 knots with a maximum speed of 151. They have a 20-second boost with a 40-second cooldown. The attacking flight is 2 with a squadron of 6. There is a single torpedo in the payload, so you're looking at 2 torpedoes per attack run. And they do a maximum of 3,600 damage. They have a 50-knot speed, which is phenomenal, actually, for aerial torpedoes. I think the highest you can get from the other aircraft carriers on average is like 40 knots at best. So these are some nice good torpedoes, and they have a 403 meter arming distance, but the range is limited to 2 kilometers, and the torpedo bombers are seen at 10 kilometers as well. You get a maximum of 9 on deck, and they restore in just under a minute. And of course the bombers, you have 1160 hit points. You get a maximum speed of 136 knots with a cruise speed of 96. Engine boost and reload time are same as that of the torpedo bombers. The squadron specifics are the same as torpedo bombers. The bombs do a maximum of 4,000 damage, and you get 1 in the payload, so that's 2 bombs per drop. And their detectability and storage specifics are pretty much the same for the torpedo bombers. Now, because this is a German aircraft carrier, she's probably going to have, well, at least not right at the moment, she doesn't have anything overly phenomenal for her secondary batteries, but, I mean, these are German these are German ships. You're going to see secondaries come along to some degree at some point. I mean, this is only the Tier 6. I mean, the Tier 8, I believe, looks very much like a Graf Zeppelin clone. So we'll get there when we get there. Her AA suite is really nothing incredible, but for a Tier 6, it's probably very workable. Continuous damage of 99 per second. She does 910 damage per explosion salvo, and she only gets 1 burst. Priority sector gives a 35% reinforcement, and the maximum firing range of AA is 4.6 kilometers. Maneuverability is nothing stellar, 26 knots, 760 meter turning circle, and a 12.1 second rotor shift. And concealment, she is seen at 9.5 kilometers, detected from the air at 7.5 kilometers, and of course she has a short detection range of 2 kilometers if she happens to find somewhere that she can hide from anybody. She does have a B hull, which looks like it changed her statistics just a little bit, adds 800 health, boosts her continuous damage to 131, and her shell burst damage to 1120, also pushing her AA firing range out to 5.2 kilometers, and her maneuverability is also affected by dropping her rudder shift down to 8.6 seconds. Now again, these are the test statistics, so these numbers are very likely to change. I will probably address them in upcoming patch notes and whatever, but this is just what she looks like for the moment. And of course, looking at outfitting her with primarily aircraft boasting skills or modules because, well, she should not be getting into direct combat under most circumstances anyway, at least not at this tier. So definitely want to focus more on your aircraft than much of anything else. Now, oh wait, I'm sorry, that was the Tier 4. Next we move up to the Tier 6, the Weser. Now here, of course, we get 4 upgrade modules, and you get upgrades for all of the aircraft, not just the hull. So let's go through and look at her armor layout to start with. And this is where we start seeing some rather interesting things from these German aircraft carriers for their armor. She's got a 40 millimeter fore-end armor belt, and beneath all of her side plating, she's actually got an 80 millimeter armor belt there as well. So you can see, I can see some penetrating damage from getting through this torpedo protection. And then this seems like a ship that will be rather difficult to Citadel, to not put too fine a point on it, on top of the fact that she does have that stereotypical German turtleback armor scheme, and it's a turtleback below the waterline, so this is going to be a very difficult ship to Citadel to some degree. And of course, a lot of her upper armor is 25, 21. The only thing that's really lower than that is her hangar and her superstructure, and that's really not even an incredible amount of superstructure to hit. So she's got some pretty decent armor on her. Definitely something of a tanky little aircraft carrier here, which I guess falls very much in line with that of the German the German line as it's been identified with the Graf Zeppelin so far. So this is kind of, I guess, a downgrade from the Graf Zeppelin, but still working in that same degree. For her survivability, she's looking at a hit point pool of 40,800 with a 10% torpedo damage reduction. Her aircraft for the baseline get up to a maximum speed of 172 knots. You get 2 aircraft to the attacking flight with 8 per squadron. You have maximum rocket damage of 1,600, 12 on deck, and you get 4 rockets in the payload for aircraft, so that's 8 rockets per attacking flight, and aircraft restore in 48 seconds. For the base torpedo bombers, we get a maximum speed of 160 knots, 1,370 hit points, a 2 aircraft attack flight with a squadron of 6, maximum torp damage of 3,600, 50 knots, short arming distance, 2-kilometer range, restore in 74 seconds, so a minute and 15 seconds, and you get a maximum of 9 on deck. And the base torpedo bombers, you get 1,220 hit points, maximum speed of 156 knots, 2 in the attacking flight, 8 per squadron, maximum of 12 on deck, and a restoration time of just under a minute with a maximum bomb damage of 7,000. Looking at her secondary batteries, she does get 5 double 105mm mounts, so these are very capable at dealing with destroyers that get just a little too close. And these have a maximum range of 5 kilometers, which I'm sure will be able to be brought out to some degree with secondary battery skills, especially secondary battery mod 1. So instead of looking at some of these attack bonuses for aircraft, you can probably look at actually starting your secondary build aircraft carrier on the tier 6. Her AA for the base hull is 173 continuous damage with 1,260 per explosion. Her long-range AA reaches out to 5.2 kilometers, and her priority sectors reinforced at 35%. For her maneuverability, she sees up to 32 knots. She has almost a kilometer turning circle, however, so not the most nimble of aircraft carriers. And she does see a rotor shift of 14.9 seconds. Finally, for her concealment, she is seen from the surface at 12.1 kilometers, from the air at 9.5 kilometers, and, of course, the 2 kilometer assured detection range. Now let's go ahead and pop, at least looking at some of these upgraded modules. Getting her B hull in place, her AA goes to a whopping 254 damage per second, no change really in any other degree, and her maneuverability is affected by a 4.3 drop in rudder shift. There does not appear to be a bonus to her hull health. For aircraft, we are looking at a small change in hit points, but primarily a increase in aircraft speed up to 190 knots and a 10% increase in restoration time. And this is jumping from the AR-197s to BF-109Es. For torpedo bombers, she goes from AR-995Bs to DO-22s with a 70-point increase in hit points, a 3-knot increase in maximum speed. You get an increase in number of aircraft per squadron, but not in the size of the attacking flight. Torpedo damage increases by 467 points. Maximum torpedo speed increases by 2 knots. A half-kilometer increase in torpedo range at the cost of an increase in torpedo arming distance. And you get an increase of 3 aircraft on deck. But, slight bonus, you get a decrease in the restoration time of one whopping second. And of course, coming over to the bombers, Going from AR-81s to HS-123s, you see a 70-point increase in health pool, a 24-knot increase in speed, which is going to be a major quality of life improvement for those bombers, I'm sure, at the cost of an 11-second additional restoration time. And again, just to put that out there, this is work in progress. These numbers are likely going to be subject to change, and given that this is an aircraft carrier and people love to hate aircraft carriers, I'm pretty much going to guarantee hands down that these numbers are going to change to some degree. Bumping up to the Tier 8, the August von Parseval, we are seeing further development of the armor scheme. Again, very well armored aircraft carrier, 25. I mean, we do see 19s. She is at least going to be somewhat vulnerable to some degree to cruiser fire, at least at this point, especially cruiser AP. And I think she's going to be at least tanky against, what is it, 19 millimeters. She's really not tanky against much of anything, actually. But her bow and armor belt are still tanky against heavier, at least somewhat heavier battleships. I think she goes up to 380 that she's capable of tanking with this armor belt. So, very respectable. And even her side plating is going to be tanky against those same caliber shells as well. Removing the fore and torpedo protection plating, she does still have a relatively thick 100mm armor belt inside of that torpedo protection. It is the torpedo... It is still, again, the German overall... The German turtleback plating. And let's just compare a little bit to the Graf Zeppelin here real quick. She is basically the same armor profile to some degree as the Graf Zeppelin, except the Graf Zeppelin actually has thicker armor to her hangar at very least, so there is that. The Graf Zeppelin at least is an upgrade over the August von Parseval. But that's really just a minor upgrade, nothing incredible. I mean, I suppose that couple of millimeters is, at least to some degree, passing a couple of thresholds that makes things harder to penetrate her. But overall, nothing incredible to write home about. So, anyway, moving on from there, we are looking at her hit points. She has 50,000 hit points in her current test iteration, with 16% torpedo damage reduction. For her aircraft, she receives a Bf-109T for the attack aircraft, which gets 1,270 hit points, a maximum speed of 193 knots, standard boost and reload time, 2 attack aircraft per flight with 8 per squadron, 4 rockets on the payload, so that's 8 rockets per attack strike, with a maximum rocket damage of 2,150 points. Of course, detectability is standard, 12 aircraft maximum on deck, and a restoration time of 1 minute and 9 seconds. The torpedo bombers have 1,500 hit points, a maximum cruising speed of 164 knots, standard engine boost and reload time. The attack flight is 2 aircraft with 8 per squadron again. Maximum torpedo damage of 4,067. 52 knot speed, 2.5 kilometer range, 489 meter arming distance, 12 on deck, and that is 1 minute and 26 seconds restoration time for these aircraft. And of course, for the bombers, you get 1,350 hit points, 183 knots maximum speed. You get 3 per attacking flight with 9 per squadron. You get 1 bomb in the payload that does a maximum of 7,000 damage. And you get 14 aircraft on deck, restoring in 1 minute and 6 seconds. And these are the base aircraft. Looking at the upgraded aircraft, You get the BF-109G, which adds 50 hit points to the health pool, an additional 9 knots to the maximum speed. You get 1 more aircraft in the attacking flight, 1 more aircraft per squadron, and you get an additional 2 aircraft per deck and a 3-second reduction to restoration time. Looking at the upgraded torpedo bombers, current iteration, they get 1,570 hit points, 25 knot increase in speed, an additional aircraft to the attack flight and squadron size, and you get 2 additional aircraft on deck, as well as a 6-second reduction to restoration time. And this goes from FI-167s to BF-110Cs. The FI-167s are also the AP bombers, or the stock bombers, going up to BF-110Cs as well. So a lot of the health statistics are pretty much going to remain the same there. Actually, no. Why would they have 2 different health statistics? That's interesting. But, okay, anyway, the bombers only have 1,410 hit points, an increase of 60 over the stock. They have only a 6-knot increase in maximum speed, and the bomb damage increases by 800. However, this is at a cost of an additional 10 seconds aircraft restoration time. Now, we are starting to get into the realm of semi-decent secondary aircraft carriers. I mean, her secondary guns are mounted on the deck, which means these should be able to fire basically at all angles, with exception of anything that impedes with conning tower. So she does have some good secondaries here. Not as strong as those of the Graf Zeppelin, however. At least not at this point. In fact, not at any point either. So she does not have the 150mm secondary batteries that are along the sides of the Graf Zeppelin's hull. She only gets the 105mm deck guns, and she gets 6 double mounters. Now, these are 105mm. They are certainly very lethal to destroyers with 26mm of penetration, but you are also starting to see reaching out to 7 kilometers. So there is that to be said. These are not lousy secondary batteries. Looking at her AA, she also has a decent AA suite. She gets 374 continuous damage per second with 1,400 damage per burst, and there are 6 explosions in a salvo. Her AA reaches out to 5.2 kilometers, which is about average for the Germans so far. For her maneuverability, she sees 31.8 knots, slightly less than that of her predecessor. She also has a massive turning circle at 1,140 meters, so don't expect her to be pivoting on a dime anytime soon. And she has an 18.2 second rudder shift. These are almost battleship-esque numbers here. For that matter, her armor is almost battleship-esque. Almost. Let's look at her concealment. She gets 13.5 kilometers from the surface, 11.2 kilometers from the air, and of course assured detection of 2 kilometers. Now, looking at the upgraded hull, she does get a slight survivability bonus of 1,400 hit points. Her AA is improved by an additional 212 continuous damage per second. Just wow there. Not entirely sure what all's changing there either. It doesn't really seem to elaborate on that too much. She goes from 37mm to 55mm short-range AA guns by the looks of it. So, and she only gets a small maneuverability bonus in a reduction of 5.2 seconds to her rudder shift. And one final note on her aircraft, I did look at the upgraded aircraft compared to those of the Graf Zeppelin. The Graf Zeppelin's aircraft are still substantially faster, reaching a blistering 227 knots with all of the proper skills chosen. And their aircraft are also a good bit more survivable, too. So Graf Zeppelin is a substantial upgrade over the August von Parseval to quite a fair degree. So definitely still a good, strong Tier 8 premium aircraft carrier in the Graf Zeppelin for those of you who enjoy the aircraft carriers at the very least. Now, finally, we get to one that I believe will be a little bit more controversial based on what I've seen and heard so far. And this is the Tier 10 German aircraft carrier, the Manfred von Richthofen. Now, I'm already looking at this ship, even without opening up the armor profile, and saying, there's a lot of armor there. I mean, in some cases, I can almost even see the armor texture. But, I mean, even just the hangar, that's a lot, that's looking like a lot of heavy armor in there. Let's see just how heavy, shall we? Okay, 21 millimeters for the hangar, that's respectable. But everything else below that, oh my dear lord. I mean, yeah, okay, she's got 19 millimeter for stern and aft plating. But, I mean, how often are you going to be showing your ass or your nose to a incoming enemy cruiser or battleship when you've got 60 millimeter forward icebreaker belt, 150 millimeter forward armor belt extension, and 150 millimeter armor belt damn near everywhere else? You are not going to be penetrating this thing if it's angled really much at all. And this is assuming that you're also looking at her at shorter range where you can actually get a chance of getting in through here. If you're looking at plunging fire, yeah, good luck. You're only going to get penetration damage on the hangar because she has seriously thick deck armor. 50 millimeters in a number of places. Her citadel deck is 100 millimeters. And you still have to get through the actual main deck of 50 millimeters, the flight deck. So yeah, this aircraft carrier is going to be extremely difficult to penetrate, and even destroyers are going to have a fairly difficult time hitting her and doing damage, because the lightest armor she has is her con tower, and that is like the most minimal amount of real estate ever on an aircraft carrier at this point in time. So yeah, destroyers are going to have no end of trouble with this aircraft carrier unless they get in short range with AP and just blast through her, basically through her hangar plating, because they're certainly not going to overmatch much of anything else here with anything even resembling AP. Let's not even discuss HE shells. The only thing destroyers are going to be relying on dealing with this aircraft carrier are literally going to be fires. Nothing more. And as we all know, aircraft carriers are practically immune to fire in their current state. Now, this is also the level at which aircraft can get a speed bonus, and that's probably going to be what we would look at here, because that is the basic bonus for just about all aircraft carriers, or the German aircraft carriers, is their fast aircraft speed. Even the stock bombers on this one, FW-190 G8s, see almost 200 knot maximum speed with 154 knot cruising speed. And even the upgraded versions, those are getting up to 214 knots. These are some of the fastest attack aircraft in the game, not counting those of the Graf Zeppelins. So the Graf Zeppelin's aircraft are still slightly faster, at least until you start popping on Flight Control Mod 2 and a couple of other captain skills. But, yeah, very definitely following the German line of thought here as far as a lot of the build. But this is going to be probably the single toughest aircraft carrier to take down from the perspective of a destroyer or light cruiser at the very least. Heavy cruisers are going to have a field day with her if they get in on her broadside, and they can definitely penetrate at least her hangar for full damage. And then, of course, you've also got battleships, which, if they get a look at her broadside at close enough ranges, well, even at that, she's got, if I'm remembering correctly, yeah, she's got the turtleback armor scheme. And it's somewhat below the waterline, too, so you're going to have a hard time citadeling this aircraft carrier from just about any range with damn near anything. Not that it's going to be impossible, but I think it's going to be highly unlikely to some degree. Now, let's look at other things. Her survivability, she sees 65,300 hit points at her current iteration, and let's compare that briefly to her counterparts. Yeah, that's the Tier 10 selection. The Hakuryu actually has more hit points. Midway has more hit points. Audacious has... So she actually has the fewest hit points of all of the Tier 10 aircraft carriers, but what she makes up for is very much in her armor. So I suppose, while she does not have the most hit points of any of the Tier 10 aircraft carriers, she is going to be survivable on her armor alone. And even at that, she only has, 6,000 hit points less than that of the Midway? But again, she's got armor. She's got armor for days. She is going to be incredibly tanky and very difficult to deal with, to quite a fair degree. As far as her aircraft, we've already started discussing them briefly. The attack aircraft in their current iteration, again, test ship. So these numbers are possibly going to change. And to some degree, I don't see why they wouldn't. Attack aircraft, base attack aircraft have 1,380 hit points, reach up to 207 knots, standard boost, 3 per attacking flight, 3 per squadron, 4 rockets in the payload, and you get 14 aircraft on the deck. Rockets do a maximum of 2,800 damage, and aircraft restore in 74 seconds. And again, these are the base aircraft. The torpedo bombers see a base 1,640 hit points, 194 maximum speed, 3 in the attacking flight, 9 per squadron, 1 torpedo per payload that does a maximum damage of 4,533 hit points. The torpedoes are now a blistering 55 knots, see 3 kilometer range, 591 meter arming distance, and they are... You have 14 on deck with a restoration time of 89 seconds. And of course the bombers, which are apparently hiding behind the conning tower here. The bombers, you get 1,470 hit points, 194 knots. You get 3 in the attacking flight, but 12 in the squadron. 7,800 maximum bomb damage, 18 on deck, and a maximum restoration time of 68 seconds. Also, with the bomb, you only get 1 bomb per payload, which is 3 bombs per attack. Looking at the upgraded aircraft, the upgraded attack aircraft have 1,440 hit points, reach a almost blistering 212 knots, and the reload time is the only other stat affected at an increase of 8 seconds. And that is going from F-190A8s to ME-155Gs. The FW-190G8s are the torpedo and dive bombers. They upgrade to TA-152C-1/R14s. And for the torpedo bombers, that is an increase to a maximum speed of 214 knots, a cruise speed of 174. The health pool increases to 1,710, and you get a whopping 99-second aircraft restoration time. Now, of course, the aircraft restoration time can be brought down with certain modules. I believe it's the flight control module. So that would be at 100-second reload time, that would drop it down to like 95 seconds. And of course, commander skills can also take a little bit of that time off as well. Now, finally, looking at the bombers, you get 1,530 hit points, 214 knots. Bomb damage increases by 1,000 to 8,800, and you get an additional 8 seconds restoration time for these aircraft. The torpedoes do not get a damage increase. Now, she only has one hull, so there is no upgraded hull statistics to go over here. But she does have one other little thing going for her here. She has 12 double 105s mounted on her, and these are actually side-mounted as opposed to deck-mounted. But she has 6 per side, and they are definitely going to cause lots of hurt to any destroyer that gets too close, especially within 7.2 kilometers. And that is her base range. We are still talking German aircraft carrier, and with her armor profile, you could probably take her into direct combat to some degree, making a secondary build aircraft carrier very viable. And with side-mounted as opposed to deck-mounted secondary guns, you don't have to wait for the secondary guns to switch sides when you are switching targets either. So there is that to be said as well. For her AA defense, her stock, and this is her full output, I might add, she sees a maximum continuous damage output of 588. Her shell explosions are 1,540, and she gets 9 bursts in a salvo, 35% reinforcement, and a firing range on her AA of 5.2 kilometers. For her maneuverability, well, let's just say it's pretty lousy. I mean, she does get a semi-decent 32 knots, but she has, I believe, I actually think this is the widest turning circle in the game, 1,200 meters. So, definitely not a nimble ship, not by any extent of the imagination. And she also has a 16.4 second rudder shift. But with that turning circle, she turns very slowly. So if you are stuck broadside to a battleship at close range, or even a cruiser at close range, you are going to eat shells. There is no doubt about that. If you can get yourself too angled, you're going to do a lot better. But if you've got somebody on your broadside with that decent armor profile, which is going to arm damn near everything, you're going to be hurting. So this is definitely an aircraft carrier that to some degree wants to get into close combat, but angled, and rely on her secondaries to do something with her aircraft supplementing her damage output, as far as basically what I've been seeing. And that's almost to some degree the same playstyle that you use in the Graf Zeppelin as it is right now anyway. So this is like the Super Graf Zeppelin with just slightly slower aircraft. Final stat for concealment, she gets 14 kilometers on the surface. She is seen at 14.2 kilometers from the air, which is interesting. Usually the air detection is substantially smaller. That's interesting stat to see. And she is seen, of course, at an assured 2 kilometers if for some reason this massive ship actually manages to hide somewhere. But yeah, that is what we're looking at for the German aircraft carriers. And needless to say, this is basically the Tier 10 is basically a battleship with a flight deck stuck on it. What else can I say? I am very sure that some of her stats are going to change. In fact, I would not be surprised at all if some of her stats changed quite substantially to make up for that absolutely ludicrous amount of armor. So anyway, that is the German aircraft carriers and the update 9.6 developers bulletin. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all found it informative as far as what is up and coming in World of Warships. And I hope to catch you all again next time. Have a good one. Happy hunting, folks.